I'm 31 and my name is Lillian. I've got a stable job, a little house that I worked hard for, and a pretty simple life. If you asked my mother, though, she'd say I'm the less successful daughter. That title has always belonged to my older sister, Vanessa, 34, married to a well-off man, a stay-at-home mom to her daughter, Emma. She's the golden child, the one who did everything right. I was the one who didn't settle down early, didn't have kids, and apparently didn't give my parents anything to brag about. For years, I watched my family put Vanessa on a pedestal, acting like she was living the perfect life while I was just there. I never said anything about it, because honestly, I didn't care much. Let them have their little fantasy. But deep down, I always had this uneasy feeling about Vanessa's family. Her daughter, Emma, is 6. She's always been quiet, too quiet for a kid her age. At family gatherings, she'd cling to her stuffed bunny like it was the only thing keeping her together. She never really talked unless spoken to, and even then, she spoke in short, careful sentences. I noticed she was always small for her age, a little too thin. Whenever I asked Vanessa about it, she'd brush it off. She's a picky eater. She's just shy. I never pushed because, again, I was the less experienced one, the one who didn't understand what it was like to be a mother. So I stayed in my lane until the day CPS called me. I remember exactly where I was. It was a regular Tuesday, and I was in the middle of a work meeting when my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, but when I saw the voicemail notification, I felt this strange pit in my stomach. The message was short. A caseworker introduced herself, said my name was listed as an emergency contact for Emma, and asked me to call back immediately. I don't think I've ever dialed a number so fast in my life. The caseworker was calm but firm. Emma had been removed from Vanessa's care due to neglect. They couldn't give me full details over the phone, but they needed me to come to the office as soon as possible. I don't even remember the drive there. My heart was pounding the whole time. When I walked into the CPS office, I spotted Emma right away. She was sitting in a chair, hugging that same stuffed bunny, staring at the floor. Her little hands were gripping the fabric so tight that her knuckles were white. She looked exhausted. Her face was pale, her hair messy, and her clothes were too thin for the weather outside. I crouched down in front of her, trying to smile even though my chest felt like it was about to cave in. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. She didn't say anything, but her eyes flickered up to mine for just a second before she looked down again. The caseworker pulled me aside and explained what little she could. There had been reports of neglect for a while. Neighbors had noticed Emma looking malnourished, wearing dirty clothes, and being left alone for long periods. Finally, someone made a call that stuck, and when CPS arrived, the situation was bad enough that they removed her immediately. I felt sick. I always had a gut feeling that something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this bad. And now I was standing there looking at this little girl who had nobody else. Then my phone rang. Vanessa. I stepped outside to take the call, and the moment I answered, she was hysterical. "This is all a mistake. You have to tell them. You have to give her back to me, Lillian. You know I would never hurt my daughter." I barely got a word in. Ow. She kept going, crying, swearing that this was all some kind of misunderstanding, that the caseworker had a personal vendetta against her, that Emma was just going through a phase. Then her voice changed. "If you don't give her back, I will never forgive you," she hissed. That's when I hung up. I went back inside, looked at Emma, and made my decision. I told the caseworker I would take her. The next few weeks were a blur. I was granted emergency temporary custody while the legal process played out. The investigation was ongoing, and I knew it would take time before any permanent decision was made. Emma was quiet at first, barely speaking above a whisper. She wouldn't eat much, and she flinched every time I raised my hand too quickly, like she was used to being hit. Then little by little, she started to relax. I found out she loved strawberries, so I stocked up. She started eating more, sleeping better. One night, I walked past her room and saw her curled up in bed, hugging that bunny, breathing evenly. It was the first time I'd seen her look peaceful. But then she started talking. She told me about going to bed hungry. It's about being locked in her room when she misbehaved. It's about how she wasn't allowed to cry, because crying makes mommy mad. I wanted to scream. Instead, I hugged her and promised she was safe. Meanwhile, Vanessa wasn't done. She started telling everyone that I stole Emma, that CPS had made a mistake, that I was just jealous of her perfect life. My parents ate it up. They called me, demanding that I do the right thing and give Emma back to her real mother. I told them if they really believed that, they should go ask Child Protective Services why they took Emma away in the first place. I stopped responding to their calls and messages and eventually changed my number. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into putting Emma back in danger. A week later, the caseworker told me something that made my blood run cold. They were investigating more than just neglect. There was evidence that Vanessa's husband might have been hurting Emma in ways I didn't even want to imagine. That night, Emma called me mommy by accident. The second she said it, she clamped her hands over her mouth, like she'd done something wrong. I pulled her into my arms and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." And for the first time, she believed it. The first sign that Vanessa wasn't going to back down came in the form of a knock at the door. A man in a suit handed over a thick envelope, legal papers. Vanessa was suing for full custody, demanding Emma be returned immediately. The official language made it sound like I had kidnapped my own niece, like I was some outsider trying to take what wasn't mine. The next call came from my mother. Her voice was tight with anger, no more pretending to be neutral. She accused me of tearing the family apart, of trying to play mother when I would never be one. There was no room for discussion, just a demand that I drop the case and let Vanessa fix this. I hung up before she could say more. Emma's nightmares started soon after. She would wake up screaming, her small body shaking as she clutched her stuffed bunny. I would rush to her room, but she wouldn't say what the dreams were about. She would just stare at the walls, her hands gripping the blankets so hard her fingers turned white. The tension outside the house wasn't letting up either. Vanessa took her fight to social media, making exaggerated claims about how I had manipulated Child Protective Services into taking her daughter away. She painted herself as the perfect mother, a woman who had been wrongfully accused. Comments poured in, some defending her, others asking questions she refused to answer. Then, mutual friends started reaching out. Some were cautious, asking what was really happening. Others weren't so kind, outright accusing me of being jealous, of wanting to steal Vanessa's life. I didn't respond. I had bigger things to focus on. One evening, in the middle of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. Emma laughed. Not a small chuckle or a nervous giggle, an actual full, joyful laugh. We were watching a silly cartoon, and something about it sent her into a fit of giggles. It was the first real sound of happiness I had heard from her. For a moment, everything else faded. But the legal battle was just beginning. I hired a lawyer, someone with a reputation for handling difficult family court cases. She made it clear that this wasn't going to be quick or easy. Vanessa had money, connections, and the ability to put on a good show when it suited her. But we had evidence. The first court date arrived fast. Vanessa's lawyer argued that she was a loving mother who had made a few mistakes, that Emma should be returned to her immediately. My lawyer pushed back, presenting CPS reports, medical records, and statements about Emma's condition when she was removed. The judge wasn't convinced enough to make a final ruling but refused to return Emma right away. The custody order remained in place while the investigation continued. Vanessa stormed out of the courtroom, muttering that she would never let this stand. Then, an unexpected witness came forward. A former babysitter of Emma reached out after seeing Vanessa's social media posts. She had always been too afraid to speak up before, worried about legal trouble or retaliation, but now she was ready to talk. Her testimony was damning. She described being underpaid, watching Emma go to bed without dinner, and witnessing Vanessa lock her in her room for hours as punishment. As the legal fight intensified, Vanessa's husband started pulling away. He made a public statement saying he had no idea about the neglect. But behind the scenes, his actions told a different story. My lawyer found out he had quietly moved money out of their joint accounts right before the CPS case started. It raised questions about whether he had been planning to leave all along. While all of this unfolded, I got Emma into therapy. The therapist confirmed what I already knew: Emma was dealing with serious trauma. She had trouble trusting adults, she was anxious around loud voices, and she hesitated before accepting comfort. Then Vanessa called. Her voice was different this time, softer, tearful. She claimed she had changed, that she just wanted to talk. She begged me to meet her, just the two of us, no lawyers, no arguments. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in a cafe, a public place. The moment I walked in, I knew I had made a mistake. There were cameras, a local news crew. Vanessa was already sitting at a table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken mother. I turned and walked out without a word. Emma's therapist advised me to cut off all contact with Vanessa for now. I agreed. My parents weren't happy about that decision, but I stopped answering their calls too. Then, a crucial turning point came. The court agreed to consider a psychological evaluation of Vanessa after multiple reports raised concerns about her behavior. If the evaluation revealed serious issues, it could heavily influence the case. For the first time, it felt like the truth was finally catching up to her. The results of Vanessa's psychological evaluation came back, and they were exactly what my lawyer had expected. The report flagged narcissistic tendencies, a lack of emotional regulation, and most importantly, an inability to recognize or prioritize Emma's emotional well-being. It wasn't a diagnosis, but it was enough to show the court that something was seriously wrong. Instead of addressing the concerns, Vanessa went on the attack. She called the entire system corrupt, claiming that courts were biased against good mothers and that she was being punished for not being perfect. Her social media posts ramped up, this time accusing CPS of being influenced by bitter people with an agenda. Some people still defended her, but the tide was turning. The more she spoke, the worse she sounded. That didn't stop my parents from doubling down. They started making ultimatums, warning me that if I didn't step aside and return Emma to Vanessa, I was out of the family. They saw my fight for custody as a betrayal, choosing an adopted role over blood. The calls and messages were relentless until I finally blocked their numbers. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting Vanessa. I was fighting my entire family. One night, as I was tucking Emma in, she reached for my hand. Her grip was small but firm. She looked up at me, hesitated, then whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Her voice was quiet, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to say it. I squeezed her hand back and told her I loved her too. As the custody battle dragged on, an unexpected ally reached out. Vanessa's former best friend, someone she had cut off years ago, sent me a message. She told me that Vanessa had always been more concerned with how she looked as a mother than actually being one. According to her, Vanessa saw Emma as an accessory, not a child. I asked if she'd be willing to testify. She said yes. Then came the biggest shock of all. CPS wasn't just investigating neglect anymore. There was now an official inquiry into child endangerment. Legal experts started speculating that Vanessa could actually face charges. The news started spreading online, and Vanessa's attempts at damage control were a disaster. She switched lawyers mid-case, filing multiple motions to delay the custody hearings. My lawyer warned me that these tactics could stall the process for months. Meanwhile, forensic reports on Emma's health were still being finalized. When they came back, they confirmed everything I had feared: signs of prolonged malnutrition and psychological trauma. The case against Vanessa was growing stronger by the day. Desperate to rebuild her image, Vanessa launched what my lawyer called a redemption tour. She started showing up at church events, making emotional speeches about forgiveness and second chances. She tried guest writing for mom blogs, claiming she was a victim of a corrupt system. And then, in what was probably her lowest moment, she set up a GoFundMe, asking for donations to help her fight for justice. The fundraiser barely made anything before it was quietly deleted. Through all of this, Emma was making progress. Her therapist encouraged her to draw, and soon, I started noticing a pattern. Every picture had two houses, a bad house and a safe house. The bad house was always drawn in dark colors, with a small, sad girl inside. The safe house was brighter, and it was always drawn with me. Then, more people started coming forward. An old neighbor of Vanessa's sent an anonymous report to CPS, saying they frequently heard Emma crying alone at night. The final breaking point came when Vanessa showed up at my house. She pulled into the driveway unannounced, stepping out of the car like she had every right to be there. She pounded on the door, demanding to see Emma. When I refused, she started screaming loud enough for the entire street to hear, accusing me of stealing her child, of destroying her life. A few neighbors stepped outside to watch. I called the police. By the time they arrived, Vanessa was in full meltdown mode, pacing the sidewalk, yelling about how she was the victim. The officers gave her one warning to leave. When she refused, they escorted her off the property. A week later, the court ruled that any visits between Vanessa and Emma would be supervised. When Emma was asked if she wanted to see her mother, she didn't say a word. She just shook her head and clung to me. The battle wasn't over. But I wasn't backing down. The first supervised visit was scheduled for a Saturday morning at a designated child-friendly center. A CPS worker would be present the entire time, monitoring Vanessa's behavior and ensuring Emma's safety. It was a controlled environment, but it didn't make the situation any easier. That morning, Emma refused to get dressed. She curled up in the corner of her bed, clutching her stuffed bunny, shaking her head at every attempt to get her ready. When it was clear she wasn't going to move, I sat beside her, brushing her hair gently with my fingers. She didn't say a word, but her grip tightened on my sleeve, her little hands trembling. It took nearly an hour to convince her to put on her shoes. By the time we got into the car, she was silent, staring out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. When we pulled into the parking lot of the center, she whimpered under her breath, so soft I almost didn't hear it. Vanessa was already there when we walked in. She stood up dramatically as soon as she spotted Emma, spreading her arms wide. The moment Emma stepped inside, Vanessa rushed forward, pulling her into an exaggerated hug. "Oh, my baby. I missed you so much." Her voice was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. The CPS worker remained neutral, clipboard in hand, observing everything. Emma barely reacted. She let herself be hugged but didn't return it. Her arms hung stiffly at her sides, her face buried against Vanessa's shoulder, motionless. Vanessa pulled back, keeping a hand on Emma's cheek. She smiled, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't you miss mommy, sweetheart? We can be together again soon. You just have to tell the judge that you want to come home." The CPS worker's pen moved across the clipboard immediately. Vanessa must have realized she'd been overheard because she quickly plastered on a bright smile and pulled Emma toward the small table where toys were set up. Emma didn't play. She sat quietly, answering Vanessa's questions in short, careful sentences. Every time she hesitated, Vanessa's smile faltered just a little before snapping back into place. When the visit ended, Emma walked out without looking back. The moment the door shut behind us, she broke down. Silent tears streamed down her face as she clutched my hand, refusing to let go. That night, the CPS worker formally recommended that the court reconsider Vanessa's visitation rights. She documented the emotional manipulation, Vanessa's refusal to respect boundaries, and Emma's visible distress. The next day, my parents called again. This time, their voices were calm, almost rehearsed. They suggested I meet Vanessa halfway, but I should let Emma spend the night at her real home. When I refused, the conversation turned cold. My mother sighed heavily before hanging up. Later that week, my lawyer called. The judge was paying close attention to the visits, and Vanessa's behavior wasn't working in her favor. But Vanessa wasn't done pushing her limits. During the second visit, she ignored the CPS worker's warnings and whispered to Emma again, coaching her on what to say in court. The CPS worker caught every word, writing everything down. This time, she reported it directly to the judge. Stricter oversight was put in place immediately. Emma started wetting the bed again. She had stopped weeks ago, but now, every night, she woke up crying, clutching the sheets. The visits were breaking her all over again. Her therapist filed an official recommendation with the court. Emma's supervised visits with Vanessa needed to stop. The emotional distress was too severe, undoing the progress she had made. When Vanessa found out, she spiraled. She went on another tirade online, blaming everyone but herself. The post became more aggressive, filled with accusations against CPS, the legal system, even me. Some of the comments were sympathetic, but most people had stopped believing her. The judge made a temporary ruling. Visitations would be halted for now, pending further review. That night, for the first time in weeks, Emma slept through the night without waking up. Vanessa wasn't going to give up, but neither was I. With visitations halted and public sympathy slipping away, Vanessa became more reckless. Her usual tactics, social media rants, emotional manipulation, and legal delays, weren't working anymore. She was running out of options, and it was becoming obvious. My parents, however, weren't letting up. Their messages became more aggressive, accusing me of breaking the family apart. They insisted I should at least co-parent with Vanessa, as if the months of court battles and CPS investigations never happened. When I shut them down again, telling them Emma's safety was my only priority, my mother accused me of ruining Vanessa's life. Vanessa, meanwhile, had started sending me erratic messages. Some were long, rambling apologies, full of excuses about how she was just overwhelmed and how she deserved a second chance. Others were outright threats, warning me that I would regret keeping Emma from her. The back-and-forth nature of it all made one thing clear: she was spiraling. Then, she took things to another level. One evening, I heard a sharp knock at my door. When I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there. Vanessa had reported Emma as kidnapped. I didn't panic. I had full legal documentation proving I was Emma's guardian. I handed over every court order, every custody ruling, every CPS report. The officers looked over everything, then exchanged a glance. They apologized for the inconvenience and left. The next day, Vanessa was officially charged with filing a false report. It was only a misdemeanor, but it was another major blow to her credibility. The court was notified immediately, and then, something unexpected happened. Vanessa's husband, who had largely distanced himself from the case, was finally compelled to speak when CPS began investigating him as well. Fearing potential legal consequences, he reached out through his lawyer, offering to testify against Vanessa in hopes of reducing his own liability. Court documents later revealed he had quietly moved large amounts of money out of their joint accounts just before CPS got involved. Whether he was truly ignorant or just saving himself didn't matter. What mattered was that he had damning information, and he was willing to use it. As the next court date approached, Emma's therapist submitted another report. It stated, in clear terms, that Emma's anxiety significantly increased whenever Vanessa was mentioned. The therapist strongly recommended that Emma have no further contact with her mother. It was more evidence in my favor, but I knew Vanessa wasn't done yet. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Vanessa, crying so hard that her words were barely understandable. She begged me to reconsider, to give her one last chance. When I stayed silent, she switched tactics instantly. Her voice turned sharp, full of rage, screaming that I was tearing apart her family and that she would never forgive me. I hung up. Then, she made her biggest mistake. Vanessa attempted to take Emma from daycare before the court officially halted visitations. The staff, already on alert due to the ongoing custody battle, refused her entry and immediately called the authorities. The daycare had been informed of the custody case, and the staff immediately called the police. By the time officers arrived, Vanessa was in the parking lot, screaming that she had a right to take Emma home. But she had just violated a court order, and this time there were consequences. She was arrested on the spot for attempted child abduction and violating a restraining order. The judge was notified immediately. My parents struggled to process what had happened. They initially blamed me, saying that I should have handled things differently. But when I reminded them that Vanessa had been arrested for attempting to take Emma illegally, they fell into an uneasy silence, unwilling to acknowledge the truth outright. They didn't ask if Emma was okay. They didn't acknowledge that Vanessa had just tried to take a child illegally. They only saw their golden daughter being arrested. That was the final straw. I went no contact with them. I installed security cameras around my house. I made sure Emma's school had every legal document stating Vanessa wasn't allowed near her. The court fast-tracked the final custody hearing. Vanessa had lost. And this time, there was nothing she could do about it. The final court hearing arrived faster than expected. With Vanessa's recent arrest and the overwhelming evidence against her, my lawyer was confident. But I knew Vanessa wouldn't go down without a fight. When she walked into the courtroom, she was almost unrecognizable. Dressed conservatively, clutching a Bible, she looked like she had been preparing for this performance for weeks. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup was soft and natural, and she moved with careful grace, as if she was playing the role of a reformed mother who had seen the error of her ways. But the judge wasn't interested in theatrics. When it was Vanessa's turn to speak, she launched into a shaky, teary defense, insisting that the attempted kidnapping was a misunderstanding. She claimed she had been overwhelmed, that she only acted out of desperation because she loved Emma so much. The judge, clearly unimpressed, cut her off mid-sentence. Violating a court order and attempting to take a child illegally wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. The energy in the room shifted. The weight of Vanessa's actions became undeniable. No one could argue that this was just a custody battle anymore. This was about a child's safety. Then came the moment Vanessa had been dreading. Under subpoena, her husband was called to testify. He sat stiffly, avoiding Vanessa's eyes as he admitted that, while he had never directly harmed Emma, he had known what was happening. He had heard the crying, seen the bruises, and ignored the obvious signs of neglect. His failure to intervene made him complicit. He wasn't innocent, but his confession added weight to the case against Vanessa. Then CPS presented their final evidence. Medical reports confirmed prolonged malnutrition, psychological assessments detailed Emma's severe anxiety and attachment trauma, and new witness testimonies surfaced from former neighbors and babysitters who had been too afraid to speak up until now. The courtroom fell silent as the child psychologist presented their findings from their sessions with Emma. Using age-appropriate methods, they conveyed that Emma consistently expressed fear of returning to Vanessa and had shown significant emotional distress whenever her mother was mentioned. The judge listened carefully before delivering the final ruling. Full legal custody was granted to me. Vanessa lost all parental rights. As the words settled in the air, Vanessa's entire body tensed. She forced herself to stay composed, her hands clenched into fists. Then, in a final desperate attempt to control the narrative, she turned to the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to be a good mother. Is that such a crime?" The judge shot her a warning look, telling her to compose herself or be removed from the room. Realizing she had lost, Vanessa turned her glare toward me. "You stole my child. I'll never forgive you." She was escorted out before she could say anything else. After the hearing, my parents made one last attempt to bring me back into the fold. They told me I could still fix things, that I could apologize to Vanessa and reunite the family. When I refused, they accused me of tearing them apart. That was the moment I knew the relationship was beyond repair. I walked away for good. With Vanessa stripped of her parental rights, the judge granted me permanent guardianship of Emma. The adoption process was set in motion, and for the first time in months, Emma seemed at peace. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Do I get to stay forever?" I hugged her tightly, whispering the words she had been waiting to hear. Forever and always. The community rallied around us. Neighbors, friends, and even some of Vanessa's former friends reached out, offering their support. Even the people who had once believed Vanessa's lies saw the truth now. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued her downward spiral online, ranting about how she was robbed of her daughter. But her credibility was gone. Even her most loyal supporters distanced themselves. I cut off all contact with my parents. There was nothing left to salvage. With stability, Emma flourished. She made friends, excelled in school, and started calling me mom without hesitation. On her 7th birthday, I surprised her with the news that her adoption had been finalized. Emma's eyes filled with happy tears as she wrapped her arms around me. I held her close, knowing that for the first time in her life, she was truly safe.